Today, we're going deep, really deep, into Ernie Vecchio's 10 Absolute Truths.
10 absolute truths.
Yeah, think of it kind of like a guide, a practical roadmap to navigating all those, ups and downs life throws our way.
And what I find so compelling, so refreshing about Vecchio's work is that it's not just some, theoretical mumbo jumbo.
Right.
This isn't some guy sitting in an ivory tower theorizing about life. Ernie Vecchio's a trauma psychologist.
He's been there.
He's been in the trenches, working with people, real people who've faced, some seriously tough challenges. These truths he talks about, they're not just like ideas to him. They're born from real life struggles, real life triumphs.
And he doesn't mess around. Right out of the gate, Vecchio throws this real head-scratcher at us. He says, we all start as this burst of light, a hopeful expectation for the future.
It's a powerful image, isn't it? And it actually connects beautifully, I might add, with this fundamental idea in science, this idea that life, right down to its core, is designed to survive, to thrive. It's like we're hardwired for hope from the very beginning, from the get-go.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. We're saying we're all born with this inherent optimism, this inner cheerleader who's always in our corner rooting for us.
That's the gist of it, yeah. Vecchio calls it this spark of consciousness, and it's unique, totally unique to every single one of us. It's that deeply personal, subjective experience, just of being alive, of wanting to express ourselves fully and completely.
It makes you think about those early years, when we're just little sponges soaking everything in. Vecchio talks about how before we even have language, we're experiencing the world purely through feeling, through reaction.
Exactly. He calls it being a feeling, sensing, experiential being. And for those first couple of years, it really is all about reacting to the here and now. It's that raw, unfiltered experience of just being. Think about a baby's senses. Everything is brand new, everything's intense, immediate. They haven't built up those complex filters that, we develop as adults, those cognitive filters.
So no, deep thoughts about the universe just yet, huh?
Not quite. It's more about that primal connection to the world, experiencing everything with this kind of pure, unadulterated intensity.
And this is where it gets even more wild. Vecchio says we don't have just one, not even two, but three organs of perception.
Three?
It's like having this internal GPS system with three different maps running at the same time.
I love that analogy. He talks about the spirit, which is all about feelings, reactions, right? Then there's the ego. That's our adaptive function, always trying to figure things out, make sense of the world. And then there's the heart. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Vecchio calls this our human compass.
Okay, you've got me hooked. But I'll be honest, I'm also a little lost. My heart as a compass, I get the metaphor, I think, but what does that actually look like, in real life, day to day?
It's about trusting your gut, that deep down sense of what feels right. Vecchio is saying that the heart, in this context, isn't just this this organ pumping blood. It's about something bigger. It represents our truest selves, our deepest desires, our values. It's not about logic. It's not about overthinking. It's about what genuinely resonates with us at our very core.
So we're talking intuition, those gut feelings that sometimes seem to just come out of nowhere.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really, really interesting. Vecchio argues that our ego, that adaptive part of ourselves, it's not meant to be at war with our heart. They're actually designed to work together, like two sides of the same coin.
Okay, I think I see what you mean. So it's not about silencing the ego, ignoring those practical considerations. It's about finding that sweet spot, that balance where our head and our heart are in sync.
You got it. You absolutely nailed it. But how do we actually do that? Well, that's where things get a little more complicated. Vecchio argues that as we grow, we start to experience this illusion of separation from that initial spark of wholeness we talked about.
An illusion of separation. Okay, now you've really piqued my curiosity. Let's dive into that. Tell me more about this separation, what it is, how it happens, and what we can do about it. This is where I think a lot of us might be thinking, wait, is this something I'm doing wrong?
You're spot on. That's where Vecchio's wisdom really shines through. It's not about blaming ourselves. It's not about that. It's about understanding the journey. Let's unpack those next few truths and see how it all unfolds.
All right. So let's pick up right where we left off. This whole illusion of separation thing.
Yeah, it's a real head scratcher,
Yeah.
So we start as these little bundles of pure connected experience, right? And then what happens? When does that start to shift? Well, think about it. As we grow up, we start developing language, a sense of self. We learn to identify as these separate individuals, like distinct from the world around us.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, I am an individual. I've got my own thoughts, feelings, experiences. So what's the illusion part?
That's the thing. Vecchio, he argues that this separation, while it feels so real, it's ultimately a construct. It's a story, a story we tell ourselves. It's a way to try to make sense of the world.
Okay, I'm listening. So how does this story of separation lead to the heavier stuff, the guilt, the shame?
Because once we're convinced we're separate, we start judging ourselves against this perceived other, right?
Yeah.
We compare, we compete, and inevitably we fall short. And that's when that guilt creeps in, that feeling that we've messed up, we're not good enough.
And shame takes it even further, doesn't it? It's that feeling of being inherently flawed, not just that we did something wrong, but that we ourselves are wrong.
Exactly. Shame, it cuts right to the core of who we think we are. It tells us we're unworthy, unlovable even. And here's the real kicker. Vecchio argues that this whole cycle, this whole painful cycle, it all stems from that initial illusion of separation.
It's like we've been set up for this collision course with our own self-worth.
Yeah.
You know, we're born with this incredible spark, this inherent wholeness, and then bam, separation hits, and we're stuck battling these feelings of guilt and shame.
And it's a common human experience. That's what's so important to remember. It's not about blaming ourselves for buying into this illusion. It's about recognizing it for what it is, a story we've come to believe.
So it's not about like going back to being a baby, right? I can't just crawl back into that blissful state of oneness with the universe.
Not exactly. It's more about understanding how this illusion, how it shapes our experience, how it drives our behavior. And that brings us to the next pieces of the puzzle. Vecchio's Truths 7 and 8. He talks about how we develop this, what he calls adaptive angst, to cope with this feeling of being disconnected, incomplete.
Adaptive angst. Okay, that sounds a little intense, man. I'm getting flashbacks to like high school exams and stuff.
Yeah.
Break that down for me. What does he mean by adaptive angst?
Basically, it's anxiety that pops up as a way to deal with this underlying feeling that something's missing, that we're not whole. Remember, our ego's whole job is to protect us, right? So if we're constantly feeling this sense of lack, this void, our ego steps in and tries to control everything.
So it's like anxiety becomes the coping mechanism, a way to manage that feeling of unease. I never thought about it like that before.
It's powerful, isn't it? And it really explains so much about how we operate in the world. We get stuck in this cycle of trying to fill the void. We're constantly trying to achieve more, be more, because on some level we're convinced something is missing.
And that's where the emotional roller coaster comes in, right?
Yeah.
The constant highs and lows, never quite feeling satisfied.
You got it. Vecchio says when we suppress or misinterpret our feelings, especially the ones that make us uncomfortable, like guilt, shame, fear, we just amplify that emotional volatility. We end up on this exhausting ride, constantly trying to outrun those feelings, only to find ourselves right back where we started.
It's like we're stuck on a hamster wheel we've built ourselves.
And to break free, Vecchio says we need to understand the difference between how our ego operates and how our heart operates. He says the ego's natural state is one of anxiety, based on lack, while the heart's more about like idling, based on longing.
Idling. That sounds almost that peaceful. Tell me more about that difference. What's it look like to operate from longing instead of lack?
It's subtle, but it makes all the difference. See, the ego, it's driven by fear, always focused on what's missing, what it needs to grab, what it needs to achieve, to feel whole. The heart, on the other hand, it yearns. It yearns for connection, for alignment with something bigger than itself. It's not about filling a void, but expressing its own inherent fullness.
So it's not that the ego's bad and the heart's good. It's more like they've got different operating systems, different ways of experiencing the world.
Precisely. And the trouble starts when we let the ego call all the shots, when we lose touch with our heart's wisdom, that inner compass Vecchio keeps bringing up.
Okay, this is all starting to make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But if we're so used to operating from that place of lack, that ego-driven anxiety, how do we even begin to tap into that heart-centered wisdom? How do we break free from this cycle of adaptive angst, all this emotional turmoil?
That, my friend, is where things get really interesting. Vecchio's final two truths, they introduce us to the 4 ego states and this really powerful concept of the neutral observer.
Okay, now you're just teasing me. Don't leave me hanging. Tell me more about these ego states and this mysterious neutral observer.
I don't want to spoil the ending, but I'll say this. Vecchio's insights into the 4 ego states, the counselor, the critic, the mediator, and yes, even the bully, they're total game changers.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. But I got to be honest, that last one sounds a little intimidating. Are we talking like different personalities living inside us, like a whole little voiceover crew just battling it out for control of my thoughts?
That's a great way to put it, actually. But think of them less like separate personalities and more like different lenses we use to see the world. We all have these ego states to some degree or another, and they color our perceptions, our thoughts, how we react to, well, everything really.
So it's not like I'm like suddenly switching personalities, going from wise old counselor to like drama queen bully in the blink of an eye.
Not necessarily, no. It's more nuanced than that. It's more about like recognizing which ego state tends to, dominate your thinking in a given situation.
Okay,
Right.
that makes sense. Give me an example. How do these ego states actually show up, like in everyday life?
So let's say you're facing a challenge at work, right? Your inner counselor might jump in with some helpful advice, maybe encouraging you to break the problem down, find some solutions. But then the critic might chime in, questioning your abilities, pointing out all the ways you could fail.
Ouch. Yeah, that critic sounds a little harsh.
Yeah.
What about the mediator and the bully?
Right. So the mediator, that's the one that steps in when things get a little heated. It's all about diplomacy, trying to find that compromise, keep everyone happy. The bully, on the other hand, well, the bully resorts to intimidation, aggression, whatever it takes to get its own way. So how do we even begin? Like, how do we find peace in the middle of all this inner chaos?
Well, that's where Vecchio's final two truths come in.
Okay.
That intelligent spark we were talking
You're
about.
right, that connection to something bigger.
Exactly. The one we kind of inherently sense when we enter the world.
Yeah.
Vecchio says we also have this neutral observer inside us, this higher consciousness, or some might even call it the soul.
Okay.
And this inner observer, it's like a silent witness.
Mm-hmm.
It's always present watching this inner drama unfold, but without judgment.
So it's like we have this wise, compassionate observer within just waiting for us to quiet down the ego a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of a comforting thought.
It is comforting.
But how do we actually access that neutral observer, the higher self, especially when these ego voices are so loud all the time,
Well, think about it this way. Your heart, the one that beats in your chest, right?
Yeah.
That's a sensory organ too,
Okay.
but it speaks a different language than the ego does.
Oh.
And Vecchio says this neutral observer, this higher consciousness, it's drawn to the wisdom of the heart.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just some woo-woo thing. It's like there's an actual connection there.
Exactly. It's about learning to listen to our hearts.
Trusting that deeper knowing.
Yes, exactly.
Mm.
And the more we do that, the more we shift from a state of reactivity to a state of responsiveness.
I like that.
We're not at the mercy of our emotions or, those habitual ego patterns anymore.
Right.
Instead, we can pause, notice what's happening, and actually choose a different path.
So we meet those challenging emotions, the anxiety, the fear, even the guilt, with curiosity and with compassion, realizing they're just part of being human.
Exactly.
We don't judge them, and we don't let them control us.
And in that space, we find more peace, more clarity, and a deeper connection to ourselves and the world around us.
He describes it as our soul, our higher consciousness. It's that part of us that can observe all these ego states, without judgment, without getting swept up in all the drama they can create.
So, like, I'm picturing like a fly on the wall just watching this whole ego circus unfold.
Exactly. And from that place, that place of neutral observation, that's where we can start to make more conscious choices.
Right.
We can see which ego state is running the show, so to speak, and choose whether we want to follow its lead or not. And the best part is Vecchio says that this neutral observer, it's not something we have to create. It's already there inside of us, patiently waiting for us to tap into its wisdom.
Wow. This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
Yeah.
So if we were to like distill Vecchio's 10 absolute truths into like one key takeaway, what would it be? What's the ultimate message here?
For me, it's this. It's truly recognizing that we are not our egos. We are not our thoughts or emotions, not even our past experiences. We are so much more than that. And by understanding these truths, by cultivating that neutral observer within, well, we can step into this whole new level of freedom, of authenticity, of wholeness.
It's like we're unlocking our full potential, not by becoming someone different, but by embracing the fullness of who we already are.
Exactly. It's a journey of self-discovery, learning to navigate the complexities of our own inner worlds so we can show up more fully, out in the world. And that is a journey worth taking.